here's a concept that, like, when you're kind of been playing guitar for a little while and you're starting to understand bar chords, can start to open up your mind to thinking about the relationships between chords. So basically what I'm going to show is how major and minor chords relate to each other. So two examples really come to mind for me. The first one that I learned was if you take a C major bar chord. So again, this is kind of intermediate, but even if you're a total beginner, I think it's worth kind of being exposed to this sort of thing. So if this is a C major chord. So this is 3, 5, 5, 5, 3, and it's a bar chord. So this chord's kind of hard to play. You can get this top note to ring out if you make your finger kind of go like that. So 3, 5, 5, 5, 3, C major. And now if we change this note, actually you could keep that note in there, but most people don't. If you take your middle finger and you put it on the 5th fret, this note just becomes super awkward to play. And now you play this chord, and you have an A minor 7 chord. So most people will drop this note out. I've actually seen some people will keep it in. But to me it's like too awkward, so I always just drop that out. So again, we're taking C major. And get rid of this note. This note is C. And take your middle finger and put on the 5th fret right here, and keeping these notes constant. And that's A minor 7. So you can tell by changing one note, the bass note, we're going from a major chord to a minor chord. Now, this actually sounds really good. C major and A minor 7. So I don't know what this does, but as you start to be exposed to this kind of stuff, then you start to think about chords a little different over time. So C, A minor 7 have a relationship, and this is getting a little more advanced if you've never thought about this sort of stuff before, but the notes in a C chord are C, E, G. And the notes in an A minor 7 chord are A, C, E, G. If I had a pen, I would just write it down real fast. I'll just write it down because it'll make it clear. So, C major and A minor, and if you play like a basic C major and A minor chord, you can also see that they're very similar. And one thing I started noticing when I was learning guitar is you hear more advanced musicians talking about chord substitutions, and I wanted to know what the heck they were talking about. And basically what that is just knowing enough about the relationships between chords to start to know, like, maybe in one song you wanted a C major chord and you had a melody, and then you wanted to sort of mix it up, make it a little bit brighter sounding. You could switch it to C major, or if you wanted it darker, you could switch it to A minor. So real quick, what I'm going to do is just write down the chord name and then the notes in the chord. So I think it's helpful to see this. So if you look at this little illustration of the notes in the chord, the C major has C, E, G, and an A minor. Actually, I wrote an A minor would be A, C, E without the G. The A minor 7 has G in it. So that G is what makes it A minor 7. So you can notice like C, E, G is right there in the A minor chord. So just by adding A in the bass, then we change that C major chord to an A minor 7 chord. And again, this concept's like, I remember when I first started hearing about this kind of stuff in chord substitution, I was kind of like, what in the world are they talking about? So chord substitution. But basically what it would mean, so chord substitution, basically what it means is, like, let's say you had a chord progression, like you were playing a song and you were doing C, F, G. So if you're playing the chord C, F, G, which would be the 1, 4, 5 in the key of C major. So if you had that C, F, G chord, and I'll play it. Let's say that was your idea for the song, which actually most songs have 1, 4, 5 chords in them. So it seems simple, but it's kind of like most songs you do it. So C, F, G, C, F, G. Let's say that was your song, and you're like, well, I like what I just was singing. I like all the riffs I was making up, but I need to make it darker. Well, you could substitute the C chord with an A minor chord or an A7, and pretty much like everything would still work because it's kind of like the same chord except for one note, the A. So you could be like, oh, let's make it darker. So now we're going to do A minor, F, G, A minor, F, G, and because those chords are so similar, like you can substitute one with the other. I'll give one more example of this real quick. So basically you could take that C chord and get rid of it and substitute A minor in there. Because if you look at C, E, G, A, C, E, G, they're almost the same. So you could take this a step farther actually. I'll just take it one step farther, and you could think, well, what if we could substitute similar chords for the F and the G? Well, it turns out that like the relationship between C and A7 is actually the same between F and D minor and G and E minor. So real quick, I'll show an example of that. Let me think of the best F. Well, really what I could do is just do it up here. 8th fret, this concept I was doing down here, the 8th fret is F major. And if you do the same thing, you take this single note, get rid of it, and change it to this. This is D7. So F and D minor actually have that exact same relation that C and A minor did. Between a major and a minor chord. Then you can actually do the same thing with G, and you could do it up here. This would be G major, E minor. So after a while of playing guitar for a while, you start to notice like, oh yeah, C and A minor are almost the same chord. Oh yeah, F and D minor are pretty much the same chord. G and E minor are pretty much the same chord. So then you can kind of think about this while you're playing. Like, it's not like you actually have to draw this out, but you just kind of see these associations. So you could be like, well, that song was just sounding too cheesy. Like, I liked the C, F, but the G, it just sort of sounded too, like, happy and like folky. So maybe I need to make it like a little darker. So I'm gonna play C, F, and then E minor. I'm gonna substitute the G with an E minor or an E7. So you could have C, F, G is super common. You're like, ah, it's just too bright. So I kind of like the C and the F, but I'm going to change G to E minor. It definitely changes the mood, but because G and E minor are so similar, like you wouldn't really like break down your song. Like if you threw a D minor in there instead of E minor, it would feel a lot different to play over it because G and D minor aren't as closely related as G and E minor. So after a while you start to get a lot of associations. Like, to me, C and E minor are almost the same chord also. Like, here's an E minor chord, and here's a C major chord. So like, look at this. It's almost like the same. There's an E minor chord. Here's a C major chord. Or if you just do it with your open chords, you can start to kind of feel it. Like, we barely changed chords. So like another substitution, or you could see it right here. Here's C, E minor. It's almost like the same spot, same chords. And just to show that, because this can be confusing, C, E, G is a C chord, and then E, G, B is an E minor chord. So like sometimes I'll write it like this for my students to see. See C, E, G over here, if I could point to it. Over here, this is a C major chord. Those are the 3 notes in C major, and then there's the 3 notes in E minor. So like almost the same. C, E, G, E, G, B. And if you play a C major 7, it would be C, E, G, B. So then you really have similar chords. So again, the whole point of this, like, once I learned this shape, I started, like, because it's good to make up a lot of songs in C major. If you just take this C major, you just go like, you just do this for a while and kind of mess around with it, like, it's kind of a fun shape. A lot of people will use it like kind of like I was just doing there, where you change more than one bass note. You go down to here, and maybe they go to F. So you can add like different bass notes also. But just play around with this, the C to A minor, and then you'll start to kind of feel like, oh yeah, they kind of got a similar sound. And then the concept of like associating major and minor chords together will start to see it, and you'll start to notice like how these patterns are in a lot of songs. So I'll give one more example real fast. Like another one, the next one that I would learn after that is you play an E minor bar chord. This is 7th fret, 7, 9, 9, 8, 7. So this is an E minor bar chord. Now if you put your first finger up here to grab that note instead of barring, and then you put your thumb on the 8th fret and keeping basically the top of the shape the same. This is a C major 7 chord. E minor, C major 7. So to me this was kind of mind-blowing when I first learned this, because it was like, wait, an E minor chord is the same thing as a C major 7 basically, except that there's just a different bass note. And the reason why this sort of thing starts to become important also is like if someone was playing C major like this, then instead of thinking of like C major patterns, like you could think C major 7, or you could think, well, I could kind of play that E minor shape. So a lot of people would disagree with that, and they think it's better to think of a C major 7 arpeggio. But I found like sometimes it's kind of cool actually, because you can get these other shapes. Like E minor for me is a really easy chord to know where it is all over the place. So it's kind of a trick, like, oh, someone's playing C major, I want to get kind of that major 7 sound. I just think E minor really fast. But when it's being played over the C, it turns out to sound like C major 7. So it's kind of like a lot of this knowledge is a little bit subjective, like how you end up using it. But sometimes you just sort of, if you know this relationship with major and minor, it can sort of open up your eyes a little bit to thinking about chords instead of always thinking about like, that chord's C, so I need to play C stuff over it. You'd be like, well, maybe I'll play E minor over that C chord, or maybe I'll play an A minor stuff over that C chord and see what happens. And you could be like, oh, I'll try D minor, and oh, that doesn't sound good. This note is going to sound bad. So you start to build up these associations, or you can even do the same thing with like, well, while that person's playing a C chord, I'll play like a G chord. And that's going to actually end up turning out kind of like the E minor did. So basically what you can do is just have someone play some basic chords and then try out different sort of patterns. So again, this was kind of more advanced, but when I was learning guitar, I used to hear all this stuff about chord substitution, and it just didn't really make sense to me. So it just does take a while, but if you kind of have heard about it early on, then when other people are talking about it and you have some idea of what they're talking about, it can become kind of a powerful concept pretty fast, especially if you want to write your own songs or if you want to solo. So anyways, that's it. I hope that was helpful. Bye.